Hello. Welcome to the Way Wednesdays. Our pleasure to be with you. That is Gary and Doug. We're pastors at the Way congregation. In case you didn't know, we are in Lakewood, Colorado. We'd love for you to come join us every Shabbat. That's every Saturday at 10:30 a.m. Mountain Standard Time. You can join us in person. That's the best, of course. And, well, you know, Gary, not everyone knows that, right? And if you can't join us in person, then do the next best thing, which is joining us virtually. We go through the Word. We have a good time. We sing some great songs, and we love celebrating Jesus. I mean, I think it's a pretty awesome time myself. So,
amen. I wouldn't miss a week.
Yeah.
Well, got to be there. Make it a point to be there now.
Yes. Yeah. So we'd love to have you join us. So very cool. Well, just a quick word to people. You got a
big announcement, right?
I know. I've been teasing this for quite a while because I've been working hard at it. And I'm really excited that this is now in print. Corrupting the Image 2. You can either go to my website, douglashamp.com, and pick up the ebook, or you can go to Amazon.com. I think you've heard of that website, and you can pick it up there as well. Just put in Corrupting the Image and it will come up. And it was a lot of fun, a lot of work, but
and a great read.
Well, thank you.
Really interesting stuff that you will discover through this work, and the way that Pastor Doug ties all this together, only he could do. No. It really is an amazing piece of work. So make sure you grab that while you can.
Thank you, brother. Well, hey, we are in Leviticus, and this is one of those books that people are like, I don't know about Leviticus. It sounds really boring, but we're going to look at some pretty mind-blowing stuff, actually person-blowing stuff today. This is where Nadab and Abihu actually get it, right? This is where they blow up, because they did not take care in what they were assigned to do. And I think it's really an amazing reminder to us that we really, we're to be very careful in all that we do. God has told us what is good and what the Lord requires of us to do justly, right? Love mercy, and to walk humbly with our God. And sometimes we think, that's a nice suggestion, and I probably should do that, but if I don't, well, he's not going to kill me. Well, he may not kill you. It may be something else that kills you. And I think we need to be mindful of cause and effect, right? If you fall off a cliff, it's not that God killed you, it's that you violated the law of gravity, and you paid the price for it. And these kinds of things happen all the time. And so this section that we're in right now really is a great reminder of being careful. So any other comments, or should we jump right into it, Gary?
I think we jump right into it. This is, we say this every week. This is the best passage, one of the best passages in all of Scripture. And it's like, and then next week we're going to say the same thing.
We're despised.
They are all really good, but there are just some great lessons to learn from these passages tonight.
Yeah, amen. Well, let's jump in and we will get into this, because they really are very good. It came to pass on the 8th day. That's where you get the Shemini, right? So people ask, where do you get the whole Shemini thing, right? It's right from there. That is where we get that. So it came to pass on the 8th day that Moses called Aaron and his sons and the elders of Israel, and said to Aaron, take for yourselves a young bull as a sin offering, and a ram as a burnt offering without blemish, and offer them before the Lord. And to the children of Israel you shall speak, saying, take a kid of the goats as a sin offering, and a calf and a lamb, both of the first year without blemish, as a burnt offering. Also a bull and a ram as peace offerings. Let me turn that off right there. As a peace offering to sacrifice before the Lord, and a grain offering mixed with oil, for today the Lord will appear to you. So they brought what Moses commanded before the tabernacle of meeting, and all the congregation drew near and stood before the Lord. Then Moses said, "This is the thing which the Lord commanded you to do, and the glory of the Lord will appear to you." And Moses said to Aaron, "Go to the altar, offer your sin offering and your burnt offering, and make atonement for yourself and for the people. Offer the offering of the people and make atonement for them, as the Lord commanded." Aaron therefore went to the altar and killed the calf of the sin offering, which was for himself. Then the sons of Aaron brought the blood to him, and he dipped his finger in the blood, put it on the horns of the altar, and poured the blood at the base of the altar. But the fat, the kidneys, and the fatty lobe from the liver of the sin offering he burned on the altar, as the Lord had commanded Moses. The flesh and the hide he burned with fire outside the camp. And he killed the burnt offering, and Aaron's sons presented to him the blood, which he sprinkled all around on the altar. Then they presented the burnt offering to him with its pieces and head, and he burned them on the altar. And he washed the entrails and the legs and burned them with the burnt offering on the altar. Then he brought the people's offering and took the goat, which was the sin offering, for the people, and killed it and offered it for sin like the first one. He brought the burnt offering and offered it according to the prescribed manner. Then he brought the grain offering, took a handful of it, and burned it on the altar besides the burnt sacrifice of the morning. He also killed the bull and the ram as sacrifices of peace offerings, which were for the people. And Aaron's sons presented to him the blood, which he sprinkled all around on the altar, and the fat from the bull and the ram, the fatty tail that covers the entrails and the kidneys, and the fatty lobe attached to the liver. And they put the fat on the breasts. Then he burned the fat on the altar. But the breast and the right thigh Aaron waved as a wave offering before the Lord, as Moses had commanded. Then Aaron lifted his hand toward the people, blessed them, and came down from offering the sin offering, the burnt offering, and peace offerings. And Moses and Aaron went into the tabernacle of meeting and came out and blessed the people. Then the glory of the Lord appeared to all the people. And fire came out from before the Lord and consumed the burnt offering and the fire on the altar. When all the people saw it, they shouted and fell on their faces. Wow. So much amazing stuff in there. Now, again, we can get kind of lost in this smorgasbord of, fatty lobe and the liver, and we kind of have a lot of those things, right? And a lot of times in our modern day, we're like, what's this all about? But look, God is not wasting ink here. He's not just putting them through a number of things that are going to keep them busy. And I think that's kind of how I perceived it at growing up and just hearing things about the Old Testament and what happened under the law and all those sacrifices. It sounded like it was just a bunch of busy work, and God's like, I'm going to just keep you guys busy, keep you out of trouble, idle hands lead to lead to mischief, right? So this is why you guys can't get in trouble. I think that's sometimes how we look at this stuff, but it's just not that at all. What are your thoughts, okay?
Well, and so as we entered into the book of Leviticus, we've been kind of in the details of things up until this point. I mean, we talked about the detail of all the different types of the sacrifices, and again, half an ephah of this, and the lobe of this, and the kidneys over here, and then we went into the garments of the high priest, and the functions of the high priest and his sons, and how all that's supposed to work, and again, very detailed the description of each one of these types of things. And like you say, I think in our contemporary day, it's easy to lose sight of really what that means. But these guys were ministering in the presence of God. They were like right there. And yeah, so these were very specific for this very specific part of geography. This didn't apply to general Israel. It didn't apply to the people, within the camp, camped around the tabernacle. This was for a very specific place and purpose and people. So this is, not the Levites, right? This is his son Aaron and his sons. Moses is right there in the thick of it as well. Of course, is the leader, but this is really a specific duty. So I'm trying to think of it. People who are set apart for a very special cause. I'm trying to think of an analogy. I think back to my military days where we were very compartmentalized. We each had our specific duty, and nobody else could do our job. There were a group of us that were trained to do this, but it was detailed. It was checklist. You think about it reminds me a lot of government, right? They document things to the nth degree, and you go through a checklist. I think of a pilot and his checklist. If the pilot doesn't do his checklist, other people sitting in the plane are going to suffer the consequences.
Right.
And so, as the high priest and his sons minister before God, if they don't follow the checklist exactly, a lot of people are going to pay the price. And that's what we're going to see here. So this is so if these things don't apply to us, for example, we don't get wrapped up in what a pilot has to do to get us off the plane and get us on our vacation in Fort Lauderdale or whatever. We just want to get on the plane and make sure that we get to our destination and our bags happen to come along with us. And then we call it a good day if we get there on time.
So we're basically reading the pilot's manual. That's what we're doing here.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean,
and if they don't do it, if they miss one little thing, or if you think about the ancillary, if the mechanics don't do their thing, we just saw the plane in Denver that the engine kind of went haywire. And it wasn't necessarily because the mechanics didn't do their thing. It was because maybe in the manufacturing, if everything just doesn't come together just right, all of a sudden you got pieces of a plane dropping all over neighborhoods in Denver. And even in some of our congregants' backyards. I know that.
That's so true.
So all these things have to happen. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I was kind of thinking about someone who goes scuba diving. When you're getting ready to go to a certain depth, right? You can go down 10, 6, 7, 8 meters without any issue. But then you start getting below that, and you need to go and acclimate yourself, right? And your wonderful wife, Chaplain Jeannie at the Way, she gave me a book called Talking with God. It's by an author named Isaacs. And I don't think he's Christian. He does seem to believe in God. And I think he's Jewish. But what I appreciate about his book is he's really gone into some very deep language studies to look at things like words like sanctify and what exactly is the ark. And his basic thesis is that God has radioactivity. I probably wouldn't use that word because that sounds like, if something is radioactive, it means that it's decomposing, and then it strikes us and it makes us decompose. God himself is not decomposing. We are, okay? And so the problem is when something that's decomposing, degenerate, is in his presence, that pure, unadulterated, crazy energy hits this degenerate thing, and I degenerate faster, right? And so Isaac's whole thesis is that the priest had to wear special garments and had to be sealed with the blood because he was going into the presence of God. And I wholeheartedly agree. This is something I've been talking about for a long time. We saw in Exodus chapter 19 when God came down on the mountain. What happened to that mountain? It was on fire. Right? That's what was happening. It was on fire. And when we look at the word kafar, which means to cover, often translated as atonement, we know that it's not about a moral issue. It has to do with some kind of a function. It's a protection because they also had to atone for the altar. Right? Look, the altar's a bunch of rocks. They didn't do anything wrong. Okay, they didn't do anything wrong, but that same principle, that state of death, degeneration, is in the very rocks themselves. That is why when Jesus comes back, it says that the Elements are going to melt with fervent heat. The mountains are going to melt like wax when he comes back. And we saw this in Exodus chapter 19, where he came down and the mountain was on fire. And that's why the mountain itself was very sacred. And there was really something, I just want to go back there to Exodus 19, because there's really something that struck me as we were going through this passage. As it goes through, God says, don't let the people come up, consecrate, go to the people, consecrate them today and tomorrow, and let them wash their clothes. Let them be ready for the third day. For on the third day, the Lord will come down on Mount Sinai instead of all the people. You shall set bounds for the people all around, saying, take heed to yourselves that you do not go up on the mountain or touch its base. Whoever touches the mountain will surely be put to death. And so this is here, it's death. He will die or will be put to death is certainly one way to look at it. Not a hand shall touch him, but he shall surely be stoned or shot. And then notice here it says with an arrow, right? That's not actually in the text. And then as we go down, God says to Moses, go down, warn the people. But you already told him, God. And then he's like, no, just go do it. And it says, but do not let the priests and the people break through to come up to the Lord, lest he break out against them. Right? So it's God who is going to break out. And again, this is not just that, God is kind of this angry God. I don't like you guys. I'm going to kill you as the first chance I get. That's not the point. The point is that God has this crazy energy that we don't even begin to understand. God is the power source of the universe. And he wants to dwell with us. But we have a compatibility issue. We're not ready to be in his presence. Just like somebody at sea level is not ready to go down 100 meters just like that. You've got to get ready. And that I know is a long way. And you got to take all kinds of precaution to go there. The astronaut has to go put on his space suit and then go into the decompression chamber, right? Where you have the space lock, the airlock. And then the air is taken out and then he can go. And then when he comes back in, you've got to condition that area. So one word that Isaacs is using for holy, which means to set apart, he uses the word condition. I think it's a fascinating idea. I don't know that I would necessarily adopt that all the time, but I think in the context of what we're talking about, it really is a very provocative word that these are technicians that need to be conditioned. They need to be acclimated, ready to go into this hostile area where normal humans cannot go, right? Humans cannot live in a radioactive, in a nuclear reactor. Humans cannot live in outer space because it's too much for us. We cannot live at the bottom of the sea. That's too much for us. But under certain conditions in the right suit with, various apparatus, we can do it. And so this is really the function of the blood. The life is in the blood, and it's the blood that is used to make an atonement. And I'm kind of bummed about the word atonement because I think it really misses the real point, which is the blood will be a covering. It will be a covering. And I'll tell you, Gary, once we understand this concept of covering, so I wrote a book some years ago called The Millennium Chronicles, and I was looking at the millennium, surprise, surprise, and I was asking myself, why are we going to have sacrifices in the millennium? This is something many people have asked. Why will there be sacrifices in the millennium? And you get a couple different answers. Some people are like, oh, there's not going to be sacrifices in the millennium. Well, yes, there is. Yes, there will be, because we see that from Ezekiel 40 to 48. Clearly, there will be sacrifices. And this begs the question: if Jesus is the sacrifice lamb, if he's the one who gave his blood, which he did, why would we need to go back and have these other sacrifices? And it has to do not with atonement, quote unquote, but with covering. And so it's the same principle. And what we need to understand, the other part of this mystery that I burned a lot of midnight oil trying to figure this out. I'm like, I know the answer's in there. And I finally discovered it, which is that there's a veil between heaven and earth. I've talked about this veil many times. So, think of the veil like, I don't know, how about a book here, okay? So you've got this book. So here's God's domain, and here is the earthly domain. But these are not spatial. It's not like there's just a big piece of paper between where he hangs out and where we hang out. But there's a dimensional difference. And it's hard to explain that exactly because I've never been there, right? But I can understand it mathematically. I can understand it conceptually, that there is a parallel universe, if you want to call it that. There's this other domain, this other dimension that is parallel to ours. And in fact, when you look at something called a tesseract, and for people that are into some of the superhero movies, you probably heard that word tesseract. But a tesseract is a 4D cube. What in the world is a 4D cube? Well, yes, exactly. It should be hurting your brain right now. So you can understand a 3D cube. Think about a Rubik's cube, right? We understand that. But the way you get to a 4D cube is you draw a right angle to one of the angles. And yeah, that's hard to do. But it is possible to conceptualize this. And then in this 4D cube, which are really cool, then you have this other dimension that is completely surrounding and enveloping the 3D. Within the 3D, of course, is where we live, right? So in that 4D space, I would suggest that is analogous to, I don't know exactly, but that's analogous to where God and the angels are hanging out. And they're going to collapse together in the millennium so that they become one, just one unified dimension instead of two separate dimensions. So all that to get to the people that are still mortal in the millennium will need a covering, because that same fiery, awesome, radically powerful presence of the Lord will be extant. And they're going to need something to cover them. They'll need that kafar, the kippur, right? The Yom Kippurim, right? This is the Day of Atonement that we talk about. It's that covering. They're going to need that so that they don't burn up in God's presence. And that is why we're going to have sacrifices in the millennium. And this is why they had sacrifices back here. It's the same reason. The difference for us today is that Yeshua came, he became the sacrifice. He did all these things, right? And so just to quickly finish up here, in the millennium, the people that are still mortal will have the opportunity to believe in Jesus, trust in him, and all that stuff. But they're going to have a kind of a grace period where they're neither in nor out. They have this time to choose, and so they'll need a temporary covering to allow them to make that choice. So,
what's fascinating is that this is not just stuff of folklore. There are people who take this very seriously. When we were in Israel a couple of years ago, we went to the Temple Institute, and where they are constructing things to be used in the altar. They're making the high priest's garments. They have constructed the implements of the inner courts. They have the menorah. They have basins for catching blood. They've got the altar ready to construct and resume the sacrifice. This is a very real thing that will follow these same prescribed methods that are laid out here in Leviticus 1 through 9 that we've been discussing, because they understand the consequence of not doing it right. It's not just good enough to want to do it. You have to do it the right way, because the consequences are dire.
Yep. Yeah, same thing. The diver can't just want to do it the right way. He has to do it the right way. And if he doesn't, it doesn't mean he's a bad person. Doesn't mean that God doesn't like him. Just means that you messed up, and now he pays the price with his life, which is incredibly unfortunate. And that takes us to chapter 10, where we see two young men, the sons of Aaron, who were charged with doing this right. This is a very big deal. In fact, chapter 9 was all about conditioning them or sanctifying them, setting them apart with those sacrifices. That was their inauguration. And now they're going to do it. Now, the word then here, it kind of gives you the sense that, they did one thing and then they immediately went and did the next. But we don't see that. It just says, and they did this. So we don't know exactly how much time elapsed between those two. We're just not told. But it says, then Nadab and Abihu, the sons of Aaron, each took his censer and put fire in it. Each put incense on it and offered profane fire before the Lord, which he had not commanded them. So fire went out from the Lord and devoured them, and they died before the Lord. And Moses said to Aaron, this is what the Lord spoke, saying, by those who come near me, I must be regarded as holy. And before all the people, I must be glorified. So Aaron held his peace. Then Moses called Mishael and Elzaphan, the sons of Uzziel, the uncle of Aaron, and said to them, come near, carry your brethren from before the sanctuary out of the camp. So they went near and carried them by their tunics out of the camp, as Moses had said. And Moses said to Aaron and to Eleazar and Itamar his sons, do not uncover your heads nor tear your clothes, lest you die in wrath come upon all the people, but let your brethren, the whole house of Israel, bewail the burning which the Lord has kindled. You shall not go out from the door of the tabernacle of meeting, lest you die, for the anointing oil of the Lord is upon you. And they did according to the word of Moses. I'm going to stop there for now, Gary, because I think there's really some great stuff that we might want to explore concerning Nadab and Abihu.
Absolutely, and over the years, I've had different. My opinion on Nadab and Abihu have changed, or gone back and forth. It's like, were they? Why did they do this? Why did they get strange fire? Were they belligerent? Were they ne'er-do-wells? Were they bad sons? Or did they just mess up? Or were they not thinking? Or were they thinking, oh, we're going to go above and beyond and try to be really righteous and kind of, go out there and do it with all the gusto we have, and we'll bring some extra fire in. And so I think that all of those are valid at some point in time. And one of the clues that we get is in Moses' words of consolation to Aaron, his brother. He says, he talks about those who want to come near to me, which kind of gives you an idea of what their intent was, is they really wanted to come near to God. This was the first sacrifice that they were bringing to the tabernacle. So you could also say, well, maybe they just didn't pay attention to the instructions, or they slipped up, they missed a step, or it's like, oh, maybe, it's like any fire will do. So here's some, it's more convenient or something like that. I don't know. But we kind of get a clue that they really had a desire to serve God, and they went about it the wrong ways with profane or ordinary, everyday fire. We see the consequence of that. We see a little bit of this on the Shabbat, right? We sanctify the Shabbat with the setting apart, with the lighting of the candles, and we, because we're not supposed to kill a fire on Shabbat. So we sanctify it, we set it apart, but the Havdalah, we at the closing of the Shabbat, we bring another fire. It's a torch, right? The Havdalah torch that we bring to again set apart the what was sacred from what is ordinary, or what is profane, or what is mundane. A number of words that we can put to that. And so we see that anything that happens within the Shabbat is really a sanctified space. And so he set it apart on either side. And that's the way I think Nadab and Abihu should have thought about this. This is a special, sanctified. You got really specific instructions that happen on this day. This is not just an ordinary service that you're doing. And for whatever reason, we don't really necessarily understand or know, they didn't follow the process and paid the consequences. Because the fire of the Lord, we saw it in the previous passage that we read, right? It came out of the tabernacle and it consumed the sacrifice. Whoosh, after seeing that, it's like, whoa. It's like, man, that's wild. It's like, you think, okay, I ought to be really careful around this because you just witnessed what happens when you do it right.
Yeah.
Now what happens when you do it wrong? Same thing, only it turns on you, right? You're no longer protected.
Right. And it says that the fire ate them. That's the word that's being used there. Tochal.
Wow.
That the esh tochalotam, right? So it ate them, it consumed them, right? So, whether they were just nothing but ashes after that, I don't know, but they were less than what they started with, right? This fire is powerful. And again, I think, the sense that I get, at the very least, that they were careless, right? I don't get the sense that they were necessarily belligerent or they're like, well, I don't care what you said, Dad, I'm going to do it my way. I don't get that sense from these guys. I really get the sense that they were just, I don't know, they were just brash and they weren't thinking. That's the sense that I get, but it doesn't really matter. They paid the price for what they did. They did not take care in what they were commanded to do. And I think the language, one reason I wanted to slow down here is that the language can be a little bit confusing because you can get the sense that God is ticked off, but I really don't think that is what's going on here. God isn't like saying, hey, I'm a great king and you really gotta, you got to prostrate yourself before me. And if you don't, I might get angry and tell the guards to kill you. That's not really the sense. He's saying that, look, I am set apart and you have to be very careful when you come before me. God's whole point is that he wants to be with the people. And notice here it says, do not uncover your heads or tear your clothes lest you die and wrath come upon the whole people. Right? So look, these guys are, they're the technicians. They've got to take care and don't do anything because you've been set apart. You've got the spacesuit on. Don't mess up your spacesuit or everybody's going to die here. Right? So be careful. You're walking here on, and this is a very dangerous operation that you're doing. We've got to take great care that you don't jeopardize everybody's lives at this point. And again, I think people read this stuff, they're like, oh, the God of the Old Testament is just a really old, mean God, and he's always angry. But he's not. So to some degree, it's lost in translation. To some degree, it's lost because we haven't spent time in this book. Mm-hmm. We haven't cared about this book or the whole front side of the Bible. We're like, oh, that's for those Jews. And yet that's so wrong. That whole attitude has made us biased against this. And so we often don't take the time to really understand what is going on.
And I think that's a really critical point, Doug. I'm glad you brought that up. And it brings me back to the conversation we had when we were talking about the sacrifices, about the balance between kavah and kana, the intent and the prescription. So the idea is that we can have great intent to worship God, to come near to him. But as we know, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, right? Mm-hmm. And so intent alone is important. Yes, our heart's desire, our intent should be to worship God. But at the same time, God tells us in his instructions that I am holy. There is a way to approach me. he makes himself accessible, right? He's not standoffish. He desires to dwell amongst us. But he says, this is how you should do it. And that's kind of the prescription. That's kind of the checklist. That is the process that we follow, where we don't come haphazardly, where we don't come willy-nilly, where we don't come just kind of with our own thoughts and ideas of how we should do that, because then are we really doing what God wants, or are we doing it the way we want to do? And is our intent then really to serve him, or is our intent really to, I want myself to be there. I want this for me, not for worshiping the Holy One. And so I think there's a real delicate balance that we need to pay attention to. And I think it transcends from the high priest to everyday folks in terms of how we should approach God and what our intent should be as we come to him in prayer, as we come to him in worship, as we come to him in any service that we do. Are we doing this to blow our own horn? I mean, the simple words that Yeshua uses when he talks about paying our tithes or supporting the poor. Don't let the right hand know what the left hand is doing. Do these things out of a pure intent and do it to serve God, not to serve you, not to bolster yourself either in the minds of others or in your own mind. And we'll pay the price ultimately if we don't get that balance right.
Roy Clariana brings a really great perspective. He says, first rule of electrician training, don't touch that thick silver wire coming out of the box if you don't know if it is live. Well said. Right? And that's a great analogy, right? That electricity doesn't care who you are. It doesn't care if you're whoever you think is really special. It'll kill you indiscriminately. And that's what we saw. We saw that with Uzziah, right, who studied the ark and he died, right? We saw here with Nadab and Abihu, they brought this strange fire. I also think that this strange fire, it says Esh Zarah, right? So this is foreign fire. And remember that the fire in the previous chapter came from God and it lit all the, the stuff in the tabernacle, right? So the fire that was supposed to be in the tabernacle was not your garden variety fire that you can make here on earth. This was fire that came from God himself, right? Yeah. So when they just bring regular fire, that's really what it was. It's just regular campfire fire, right? It's that kind of fire that you get, earth-grown kind of fire. They brought that into God's presence, and I think it was explosive. I think that, it's like you're bringing, what are the two things you're not supposed to mix together? Bleach and something, or
ammonia.
One of the ammonia. Yeah, don't mix these together. Boom, right? You'll have a massive explosion, and the chemicals don't know. They don't care. It's just that's what happens when you mix these things, and that's what happened. When they were not careful with this Esh Zarah.
And it's really interesting when you look at the fire of God. We see it first, I think, at the covenant with Abraham, right? As a smoldering furnace and as a fiery torch going in the covenant between the parts. We see another expression of that as Moses comes to the bush that was not consumed. It's interesting how you can be in the presence of the fire. Moses is standing on holy ground. Take off your sandals. Mm-hmm. If Moses hadn't taken off his sandals, we can kind of guess what would happen. But it's interesting that the bush is not consumed. The fire of God is different. The man's fire, the bush would have been consumed, right?
That's right. Yeah.
We see it again as the pillar of fire by day comes down between the children of Israel standing on the shore of the Sea of Reeds and the Egyptians that are coming after them, and then follows them through the wilderness. And of course, you already talked about how the fire of God consumed the top of Mount Sinai, right? But not Moses. and so
Right.
God's fire is when it's used, or I guess when we approach it properly, it has very different characteristics than the fire of God that comes and consumes and brings judgment, because we see that fire as well throughout Scripture.
Yeah. Well, it's like electricity. It can, it's powering all the stuff that we're using right now to do this broadcast and the lights and all those things. Very beneficial, right? But if I just put my hand in the socket, I will get a very different experience. So that's the thing, is that we have to approach it properly, and we have to approach God properly. Certainly back then, and certainly if you are a technician, you had better be careful as to how you go about this. Well, so he goes on, it says, then the Lord spoke to Aaron, saying, do not drink wine or intoxicating drink, you nor your sons with you, when you go into the tabernacle meeting, lest you die. It shall be a statute forever throughout your generations, that you may distinguish between holy and unholy, between unclean and clean, and they may teach the children of Israel all the statutes which the Lord has spoken to them by the hand of Moses. And Moses spoke to Aaron and to Eleazar and Ithamar, his sons who were left, take the grain offerings that remains of the offerings made by fire to the Lord, and eat it without leaven beside the altar, for it is most holy. You shall eat it in a holy place, because it is your due and your son's due of the sacrifices made by fire to the Lord, for so I've been commanded. The breast of the wave offering and the thigh of the heave offering you shall eat in a clean place, you, your sons, and your daughters with you, for they are your due, and your sons' due, which are given from the sacrifices of peace offerings of the children of Israel. The thigh of the heave offering and the breast of the wave offering they shall bring, with the offerings of fat made by fire, to offer as a wave offering before the Lord, and it shall be your sons and your sons with you by a statute forever, as the Lord has commanded you. Then Moses made careful inquiry about the goat of the sin offering, and there it was burned. There it was, burned up, and he was angry with Eleazar and Ithamar, the sons of Aaron, who were left, saying, why have you not eaten the sin offering in a holy place, since it is most holy, and God has given it to you to bear the guilt of the congregation, to make atonement for them before the Lord? See, its blood was not brought inside the holy place. Indeed, you should have eaten it in a holy place, as I commanded. And Aaron said to Moses, look, this day they have offered their sin offering and their burnt offering before the Lord, and such things have befallen me. If I had eaten the sin offering today, would it have been accepted in the sight of the Lord? So when Moses heard that, he was content. Wow. All right. Well, there's some deep stuff in here, Gary. I tell you, there's some really deep stuff in here. We got to take some time here to sort this out. What do you think?
Well, again, it really deals again with understanding how you were going to approach God. And Aaron and his sons, they know what they're supposed to do, but they just, I get the sense that this is right on the heels. They had taken their sons out, and they're still going through this process of offering up these initial sacrifices and going through the procedure for the first ever sacrifices in the tabernacle in the wilderness. And so you're having to deal with all of these things and trying to do them properly. And Moses, he's really earnest in terms of saying, look, we can't mess this up again. Aaron, you only have so many sons. They can't continue to mess up. We won't have any priests left. We need to keep going. No, so seriously. What I really like about this passage, Joe, is that there's this dialogue that happens where Moses sees one aspect of how the procedure is supposed to go, and Aaron says, no, there needs to be a compensation. We need to compensate because of things that have occurred. And so this is the compensation we made. We ate it this way, or I have atonement here, so we could be covered in making sure that the way that this was eaten was still done properly, or even if not properly, it's atoned for, covered, and everything will be fine. And we see the atonement at work here. That's that last phrase that really I thought was interesting. He says, "Oh, okay, Moses. Okay, well that's cool."
Well, there's really something that's sticking out to me here. So you've got the goat of the sin offering. There it was burned up. He's angry with them, of course. Why have you not eaten the sin offering in a holy place? This is, of course, holy to make it. And God has given it to you to bear the guilt of the congregation to make atonement for them before the Lord. So yeah, of course, you have the happenings of the day. Those are, of course, interesting and somewhat unfortunate, but there's something there in that language right there. So he was supposed to eat he and his sons and his family were supposed to eat the sin offering, and it says that you will bear, right? God has given it to you to bear the guilt of the congregation to make atonement for them. And the word there is laset, which is the same as nasa or nose. And that word nose, we saw that, Gary, we saw that back in Exodus chapter 34, where God came and he proclaimed his name. Instead of showing his glory, he proclaimed his name, and he said, he is the God that carries sin, transgression, and iniquity. We see the same thing in Isaiah 53, where the suffering servant, Yeshua, he bore the sins, the iniquities of the people. I mean, there's something interesting about that. And the fact that they're supposed to eat this, right? This is the sin offering, right? So this animal has received the sins of the nation upon itself, right? So we know that this was done by laying their hands on this animal, and then, somehow vicariously the sins were then applied to this animal, right? And then after that happened, then it was killed, right? And that was the atonement. So this covering was made possible because the sins were placed on that animal, and then the animal bore the penalty, if you will. It took that, it offered its blood in place. I don't know. Are you seeing something here where does this sound kind of New Testament Jesus kind of stuff? I don't know. What do you think?
I love the connection you make with that the idea of the priesthood is to carry the sins of the people as they minister, because the sin offering was brought frequently, and it was their job to offer it up and serve as this intermediary to carry atonement, to make atonement for the people, and to carry the sins. And of course, we see that absolutely when we link that with Isaiah 53 and Isaiah 53 to the mission of Yeshua, to carry and bear our sins, right? Carry them.
Yeah.
I think that's exactly what the picture and the type and the shadow is.
And just let me throw in the word to carry or bear is the same word as forgive, right? So it's the same word.
Wow.
It's the same exact word.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's cool. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's go back there to to Exodus 34, because this is big stuff right here. And the Lord passed before him, proclaimed, the Lord, merciful, gracious, long-suffering, abounding goodness and truth, keeping mercy for thousands, forgiving, right here. Okay. So here it is, no say. This is just the participle, whereas before we saw the infinitive, but it's the same word, right? And you can see here this word to lift, bear up, carry, take, lift up. And then, of course, it also means to forgive. So it's the same word that's being used. And that's why, sometimes we do lose some things in translation. That's why we have to go back to the original languages to look at the underlying word. It's not that the translators were wrong. It means forgive, but it also means to carry, and when you're just reading in Hebrew, you're like, oh yeah, I know this word. It means, this is the word. But in English, we have to make a decision. Wait, do I use it this way or this way? When it really can mean both. So the priest was to carry the sins. I don't know if we could say he was to forgive the sins. That may be going too far. But it's the same word. We do have the same word that's being used here. And of course, Jesus is the high priest.
Or is it the act of carrying the sins brings forgiveness? It could be.
I know. This is the thing, that it's rich. Like, there's so much in this passage here. But again, this verse right here, why have you not eaten the sin offering in a holy place, since it is most holy, and God has given it to you? So if we just substitute the word, is given it to you to forgive the guilt of the congregation. Or perhaps the better thing to do is, instead of putting in the word forgive, because, in our English minds, we're like, I'm sorry. Yes, I forgive you. It's not so much that, we're making an apology and God's like, okay, I forgive you. But it's to carry, really, and you think about it, if you lend me a $10,000, right? You're like, I'm a Gary, I really need some money. Can you help me, brother? Yeah. Okay. And so you go, Gary's like, I'm not stupid.
There you go.
Gary, I need your help. And you're like, okay. And you get a second mortgage on your house, right? You get a second mortgage because you're moved with mercy for me and all these things. And then, I promise to repay you in a year or whatever. A year goes by and I'm like, I'm sorry, Gary, I don't have the money. Right. And I ask you, will you please forgive me? And you're being a nice guy. You're like, okay, I forgive you. But look, you still have the mortgage, right? You still have that second mortgage on your house for $10,000. So even though you have released me of the debt, you're still carrying the debt. You're carrying the debt. Yeah.
Right. Literally. Yeah. It makes sense.
And so that's the thing, is that God forgave us. He released us of the debt, but he had to carry the debt.
Yeah.
And we know what he did, right? He went to the cross and he carried the debt. He became the lamb. He became the priest, right? He bore our guilt. Right? This is the same language, right? He bore our guilt, right? And that's exactly what we have here, is that you will bear the guilt of the congregation to make atonement, to make a covering for them before the face of the Lord.
Wow.
Wow.
It is. It's a beautiful thing. And so when we read in Hebrews that all of these things are types and shadows, God had this plan in mind from the beginning, since he set the children of Israel apart, since he brought them out of the land of Egypt, and probably long before that. But we really see the plan come together and carried forward from this day forward up until the destruction of the first temple, and then reestablished when they returned to the land from Babylon, and until the destruction of the second temple, and is being prepared again to be reinstated for this very same purpose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, we're up to chapter 11, and great stuff in chapter 11. We cannot skip this chapter. It's way too important to skip it.
Let's go.
But we might not
get through it. I don't know.
We might do some of the highlights. Let's say that. Okay.
Okay, that sounds good.
All right. So now the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying to them, "Speak to the children of Israel, saying, these are the animals which you may eat." That's the key word there. Among all the animals that are on the earth, among the animals, whatever divides the hoof, having cloven hooves and chewing the cud, that you may eat. Nevertheless, these you shall not eat among those that chew the cud, or those that have cloven hooves. The camel, because it chews the cud but does not have cloven hooves, is unclean to you. The rock hyrax, because it chews the cud but does not have cloven hooves, is unclean to you. The hare, because it chews the cud, but does not have cloven hooves, is unclean to you. And the swine, though it divides the hoof, having cloven hooves, but yet does not chew the cud, is unclean to you. Their flesh you shall not eat, and their carcasses you shall not touch. They are unclean to you. These you may eat of all that are in the water. Whatever in the water has fins and scales, whether in the seas or in the rivers, that you may eat. But in all the seas or in the rivers that do not have fins and scales, all that move in the water, or any living thing which is in the water, they are an abomination to you. They shall be an abomination to you. You shall not eat their flesh, but you shall regard their carcasses as an abomination. Whatever in the water does not have fins or scales, that shall be an abomination to you. And these shall be regarded as abomination among the birds. They shall not be eaten. They are an abomination: the eagle, the vulture, the buzzard, the kite, the falcon after its kind, every raven after its kind, the ostrich, the short-eared owl, the seagull, and the hawk after its kind, the little owl, the fisher owl, and the screech owl, the white owl, the jackdaw, and the carrion vulture, the stork, the heron after its kind, the hopu, and the bat. All flying insects that creep on all fours shall be an abomination to you. Yet these you may eat of every flying insect that creeps on all fours, those which have jointed legs above their feet, with which to leap on the earth. These you may eat: the locust after its kind, the destroying locust after its kind, the cricket after its kind, and the grasshopper after its kind. But all other flying insects which have 4 feet shall be an abomination to you. By these you shall become unclean. Whoever touches the carcass of any of them shall be unclean until evening. Whoever carries part of the carcass of any of them shall wash his clothes and be unclean until evening. The carcass of any animal which divides the foot, but is not cloven hoofed, or does not chew the cud, is unclean to you. Everyone who touches it shall be unclean. Whatever goes on its paws among all kinds of animals that go on all fours, those are unclean to you. Whoever touches any such carcass shall be unclean until evening. Whoever carries such a carcass, is unclean to you. These also shall be unclean to you among the creeping things that creep on the earth: the mole, the mouse, and the large lizard after its kind, the gecko, the monitor lizard, the sand reptile, the sand lizard, and the chameleon. These are unclean to you among all the creep. Whoever touches them when they are dead shall be unclean until evening. Anything on which any of them falls, whether when they are dead, shall be unclean, whether it is an item of wood or clothing or skin or sack, whatever item it is in which any work is done, it must be put in water, and it shall be unclean until evening. Then it shall be clean. Any earthen vessel into which any of them falls you shall break, and whatever is in it shall be unclean. In such a vessel, any edible food upon which water falls becomes unclean, and any drink that may be drunk from it becomes unclean. And everything on which a part of any such carcass falls shall be unclean, whether it is an oven or cooking stove, it shall be broken down, for they are unclean, and shall be unclean to you. Nevertheless, a spring or a cistern in which there is plenty of water shall be clean, but whatever touches any such carcass becomes unclean. If a part of any such carcass falls or on any planting seed, which is to be sown, it remains clean. But if water is put on the seed, and if a part of any such carcass falls on it, it becomes unclean to you. And if any animal which you may eat dies, he who touches its carcass shall be unclean until evening. He who eats of its carcass shall wash his clothes and be unclean until evening. He also who carries its carcass shall wash his clothes and be unclean until evening. And every creeping thing that creeps on the earth shall be an abomination. It shall not be eaten, whatever crawls on its belly, whatever goes on all fours, or whatever has many feet. Among all creeping things that creep on the earth, these you shall not eat, for they are an abomination. You shall not make yourselves abominable with any creeping thing that creeps, nor shall you make yourselves unclean with them, lest you be defiled by them. For I am the Lord your God. You shall therefore consecrate yourselves, and you shall be holy, for I am holy. Neither shall you defile yourselves with any creeping thing that creeps on the earth, for I am the Lord who brings you up out of the land of Egypt to be your God. You shall therefore be holy, for I am holy. This is the law of the animals and the birds and every living creature that moves in the waters, and of every creature that creeps on the earth, to distinguish between the unclean and the clean, between the animal that may be eaten and the animal that may not be eaten. All right. Well, I got through it.
Very good.
Of course, was a lot in there, but I really wanted to get through that because there's so much in there that is super important. And really, if we just look at the principles, they're pretty simple, right? You can eat any animal as long as it has cloven hoofs and it chews the cud. So certainly cows fall in that category. Sheep fall in that category. Of course, deer and various other animals fall into that category. And then he gives really the exceptions, right? It's things that seem to kind of fit the rule, but really don't, just to make it clear what is not. And he makes it so clear what you may eat. That is the definition of food. That is the definition of food. I'm going to say that again. What you may eat is the definition of food, right? We all know this. This is why we put...
That's a really key distinction. It's like when we talk about what is food, if we think about what is food that we would look at today in our cupboard or our refrigerator, we would identify things as food. If there were things in there that a mouse or a bat or some other kind of weird thing that we didn't really identify what it is, it's like, okay, that's in my refrigerator, but that is not food. We wouldn't even think of it to eat it because we don't consider it food. Our pets or things like that are not considered food. So I think that it's a point that we don't want to lose here. So I just wanted to emphasize that. So go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. We put locks on in our kitchen cupboards, the lower ones.
I put locks on my bagels.
That's good. That's good. Yeah. But but when you have little kids around, you don't want them getting to the chemicals underneath the sink. Yes, they're able to physically put it in their mouth, but that doesn't make it food. Being able to ingest something into your body does not make it food. Pouring bleach into your body does not make it food, right? Or any other harmful chemicals or anything that little kid can stuff in his mouth and swallow doesn't make it food.
It's like those new laundry pods, right? They look like candy. They're bright colored and they're nice little package. It's like, now you'll find quickly it's not food. Right. Yeah.
It's incredibly dangerous to you. And that's really what God is getting at. And this whole idea of being unclean, it doesn't mean that you're an immoral person or that you're a bad person. It's just that when you digest or ingest these things, then you're now taking on the uncleanness of these various animals. And again, a lot of these things we know just instinctively. We know that mice are nasty, right? Because they are, right? They're just, it's not that mice are bad little creatures. It's just we're not supposed to eat them. That's really the point. And I think, 99% of Americans would agree with almost everything on this list. They'd be like, yeah, I don't want to eat vulture. That's nasty. Who'd want to eat vulture? Who'd want to eat camel or something like that? But there are certain animals on this list that our society, especially our Western society, has said, no, these are okay. These are okay for food. And then what happens invariably, and I just want to take another moment because I think this is absolutely critical. 1 Timothy 4. This is where we get into, this whole debate with some people that are not keeping Torah and aware of how cool keeping Torah can be. They'll say, well, it's the doctrines of demons. Speaking hypocrisy, lies and hypocrisy, having their own conscience seared with a hot iron, forbidding to marry, and commanding to abstain from foods which God created to be received with thanksgiving by those who believe and know the truth. For every creature of God is good, and nothing is to be refused if it is received with thanksgiving. So therefore, what happens is we say, God, thank you for the bacon and the pork chops. Now pass the ham, right? And that's what we do is just like, well, I'm giving thanks for it. I'm giving thanks for this ham sandwich. Therefore, it's okay because I call it food. But it doesn't matter what you and I call it. If God says it's not food, then guess what? It's not food. That's the bottom line.
Well, it's no different than Nadab and Abihu, right? They brought fire. They didn't bring the designated fire. Mm-hmm. They didn't bring what was considered fire acceptable for the service of God. And I love how God says, you are sanctified. you are holy, I am holy. We're to emulate godliness, right? And we do so in these clear instructions of what to have in our diet or what not to. And again, I think it's really important that we're not in condemnation of people who are eating pork and doing things like that. We're simply pointing out God intended in this passage and throughout Scripture to say this is what you should consider food. I have set this apart for you for you to enjoy, and these other things you should not partake of. So whether you choose to or not, that's between you and God. But I would just encourage you to look at the plain, simple words of what God tells us, and interpret this idea of these are the foods that God made. When you look to giving thanks for the food that you're putting on your plate, is it food that God said was food, or is it food that you said was food? Because again, we're not necessarily the best ones to be making decisions about what's good for us or not when God tells us something that's contrary to that.
It's a great point, because I tell you, if it were up to us to kind of make these things up, we'd be doing all kinds of stuff that feels good for a moment, right? It's pleasurable. The temptation is strong, kind of think in the whole lust area, right? We'd be going for this stuff, right? And yet, even though it is pleasurable for whatever duration, it doesn't last. And it leaves you feeling even more empty than when you do it the way God says to do it. And that's the same thing with these things. So any animal that God said, you don't eat this, that is not food. So therefore, when we're looking at this passage here in 1 Timothy 4, when he says that the doctrines of demons is to abstain from foods which created to be received with thanksgiving. Food, that's the key word there. Mm-hmm. So a doctrine of demon would say you're not supposed to eat cows. Okay, well that's interesting, because in India, the cow is sacred. You're not allowed to eat it. Well, there you go. That's a doctrine of demons, right? That right there is a doctrine of demons. I'm not saying you have to eat cows, but to say that you cannot eat cows, that is the doctrine of demons. Whereas to say that you cannot eat or should not eat pigs, that's not a doctrine of demons. That is a doctrine of God. And there's a huge difference. Yeah. And so we're not trying to throw stones at people that still have those things on their diet, but we're looking at the text. And I'll tell you, I had to deal with this same stuff. I grew up eating pork and shrimp and you name it. Okay. I had all that stuff. I thought it was amazing. And then I came to this fork in the road, and I'm like, wait, no pun intended, of course. But, I came to this fork in the road, and I'm like, why am I eating this when, if it wasn't good enough for those people, why would it be good enough for me? And where did God change this? Right. And we don't have time to go into all the different arguments, of course. You got Acts chapter 10, et cetera, which is also part of the Parashat Shavua. But, God never said that these things are back or that they're on the menu suddenly. He never said that.
And simply because you can prepare it, it tastes good, it doesn't make you sick, or you don't die eating things that still, it doesn't make it food. Just because you can prepare it and it tastes good doesn't make it food, right? Mm-hmm. God is the one who determines what is acceptable to eat or not.
Yep. Yeah. Well said. And we're only 8 minutes over, and we got through all 3 chapters. So that was pretty good.
Yeah, I don't think we've ever covered a chapter in 8 minutes.
We like to be
something to chew on.
Yeah, there you go. Very good. All the food puns come out now. Oh, well, fantastic. Well, Gary, again, pleasure doing this Midrash with you. And
it was great to see you.
We want to give a shout out to all of our people that are in the chat. We
and Hey, there was a question. There was a
Yes.
question in the chat, and how do I get my hands on this Hebrew English version of the Bible?
Okay.
So, Doug, can you give a plug about the Word software?
Absolutely. So it's called the Word software. You can go to theword.net and you can download this for free. It works on PCs. I'm sorry, Mac people, but it works on a PC. It's free. They have, goodness, hundreds.
That's fabulous. Fabulous software. Yeah.
Yeah. I years ago, I used to help with some of the a little bit of the development. I didn't write the code or anything, but I got to help with compiling the library and stuff, and it's really great.
And if you go back into the Doug Hamp video archives, he does a lot of teaching on how to use and optimize the use of this software. So it's I've adopted it as my main Bible software on my laptop, and it really is. And the fact that it's free and there's so many internal resources available within the Word software, it's really a great piece of work.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is good. So I encourage you to do that. Theword.net is where you can get that. Word.net. Well, fantastic. Many blessings to everybody. Encourage you, of course, to stay in the Word. Hope you can join us tomorrow night. We're going to have the Prophecy Roundtable. That starts at 6 Mountain Standard Time. And then, of course, on Shabbat, we are going to have our Shabbat service starting at 10:30. We have worship, and then the teaching starts about 11:15. So
Yeah, come and join us.
Yes.